Okay, I want you to picture a scenario, and it's honestly a little terrifying. You're sitting across from a close friend, someone you've known for years. You're having coffee, you're venting, feeling safe, and then they just look you dead in the eye and say, "You are becoming a work of fiction. You're a character that only exists in books."
Oof. That's visceral.
Right.
Most of us would take that as a huge red flag. It sounds like an intervention, like they're telling you you've lost the plot or you're being fake.
That was my immediate reaction when I read the source material for today. It just felt like an accusation, like you aren't real anymore. But what we're diving into today is this fascinating set of documents. There's a blog post, The Architect of the Written Self, from Faroohz's blog, and then a companion script called The Fiction of Me.
Okay.
And the author, Farah Manjali Rawashta, she takes that accusation and completely flips it on its head.
It's a classic reframe, but one with some really deep psychological implications. Because instead of getting defensive or feeling insulted,
Which I would have. Oh, me too. But she basically says, "Thank you for noticing." She took it as confirmation.
confirmation that her project was working.
Exactly.
Which just begs the question, what is that project? Who intentionally sets out to become a work of fiction?
Well, that's it.
So today we are exploring this idea of narrative identity, but not in some, dry academic sense. We're looking at how one person used her professional skills to essentially rewrite her soul.
And it's not just about telling stories. It's about control. It's about taking the chaotic, messy input of daily life and forcing it into a structure where she becomes what did she say? The protagonist, the plot twist, and the central arc.
I have to admit, when I first read that, being the plot twist of your own life, it sounded cool, but also a little exhausting.
It sounds like a lot of work.
So much work. So let's look at the architect herself. Who is Farah, and why is she thinking about her life in terms of plot points and character arcs? Well, this is where her background is, I think. Crucial context. She isn't a novelist. She's a marketer. The sources say she has spent over 13 years building brands for other people.
Okay, so she's a pro at the whole corporate identity game.
Right. And think about what that job actually is. When you build a brand for a client, you don't just throw everything at the wall. You curate. You decide on the voice, the values, what the visual language looks like. You create a brand Bible. You strip away all the noise to create a clear signal.
Sure, that makes total sense for a sneaker company or a tech startup. You need a unique selling proposition. You need consistency.
No.
But she's applying this logic to a person, to herself.
And that is the pivot point in The Architect of the Written Self. She decided to turn those weapons, those skills, inward. She writes about drafting her own brand on her blog, and she calls her life a classic story told in an unconventional way.
That phrase really stuck out to me, too. It sounds lovely, but I have to push back a little. I mean, doesn't applying corporate branding to your own personality feel a bit, I don't know, sociopathic?
Or at least incredibly cold, right?
Yeah. If I'm branding myself to my friends, am I really connecting with them anymore?
It's a valid skepticism. We usually associate branding with selling something, which implies a level of, manipulation.
Right.
But looking deeper into her text, I don't think she's doing this to sell a product. She's doing it to manufacture coherence.
Coherence. What do you mean?
Well, think about how messy modern life is. We're bombarded with information. We have different roles at work, at home, online. It is so easy to feel fragmented. By applying a brand framework to herself, she isn't trying to trick others. She's trying to understand herself. She's trying to find the through line in all the chaos.
So it's less about how do I look to you and more about who am I to me?
Precisely. Although the sources do suggest she is very aware of the external perception. But the primary goal seems to be internal. It's a way of organizing the self.
Okay, speaking of organization, we have to talk about the mechanism she uses. Because she mentions something that, well, I think a lot of people might relate to, but she frames it in a way I've just never heard before. She talks about her ADHD.
This was one of the most surprising parts of the deep dive for me. I mean, usually the narrative around ADHD is about deficit, right? Attention deficit, disorganization, losing your keys, forgetting appointments.
Right, the whole scatterbrain stereotype.
But Farah claims her ADHD has actually turned her into a meticulous record keeper.
How does that even work? That seems completely contradictory.
Well, if you dig into how neurodivergence often works, it's not always a lack of attention, it's a regulation issue. And for many people with ADHD, there's a profound fear of object permanence applied to time and memory. If I don't write this down, it's just gone forever. The moment dissolves.
Oh, wow. So the record keeping is a defense mechanism against forgetting your own life.
That's how I read it. She writes in the script, The Fiction of Me, that she drafts, edits, and archives her days. And that word archive, it's heavy. It implies she isn't just living through Tuesday. She is actively processing Tuesday so that it can be stored and retrieved later.
It reminds me of a film editor. You know, you shoot hours and hours of footage. That's just living your day. And most of it is boring. Some of it is blurry. Some of it is just audio noise.
Exactly.
If you just dump that raw footage on a screen, no one would watch it. It wouldn't make any sense.
Right. And she is saying that her brain, her brand manager brain, is constantly in the editing suite. She's cutting the noise, she's color grading the memories, and she's deciding what makes the final cut of the story of Farah.
But this brings me back to the whole fiction accusation. If you are editing the footage, aren't you altering the truth? If I cut out the part where I was grumpy in the morning and only archived the part where I was productive in the afternoon, am I lying to myself?
That is the million-dollar question. And her critics, the people she alludes to in the blog post, they seem to think so. They call it withdrawal. They see this curated persona and they assume it lacks authenticity.
I mean, I can see why they'd think that. We live in the age of Instagram versus reality. We are conditioned to think that curated equals fake.
But Farah pushes back on this incredibly hard. And this is where the deep dive gets really emotional, because she moves away from the marketer logic and into something much darker and more human. She says this construction isn't vanity, it's survival.
That word, it just stopped me in my tracks. Survival.
It reframes the entire conversation. She explicitly states that her personality is curated by experience and trauma.
Okay, let's unpack that. Curated by trauma. What does that actually look like in practice?
Well, trauma is so often defined by loss of control. Something happens to you that you can't stop, and it just shatters your sense of safety and fragments your narrative. Suddenly, the world doesn't make any sense.
So by treating her life as a brand or a story that she writes,
she reclaims the control. She says, when you've dealt with trauma, you construct a character that can handle the world.
That is actually really profound. It's like building a suit of armor. The raw you is soft, vulnerable, maybe easily hurt. But the character you build, the protagonist, she can handle the meeting, she can handle the conflict, she can handle the bad news.
And she admits this character has shadows and flaws. It's not a perfect character. But she says it is the only version of me that feels safe. So when the friend says, you're a work of fiction, the friend thinks they're insulting her. But for Farah, that fiction is the shield. It's what keeps her alive.
It really changes how you view authenticity. We usually think authenticity is, hashtag no filter, crying on camera, letting it all hang out.
Right.
But she is arguing that there is an authenticity in the architecture itself. The fact that she built this self is the authentic truth of who she is.
It's the difference between a house that collapsed and a house that was rebuilt with reinforced steel. Is the reinforced house fake because it's not the original structure?
Yeah.
No, it's just adapted. It's fortified.
This leads to a really interesting shift she mentions in the timeline. She talks about turning 33 and how her motivation changed.
Yes, the age 33 pivot. She says before that, maybe there was an element of performance. But now, she explicitly states she is no longer looking for external validation. She is looking for self-belief.
And that's a critical distinction, especially for a marketer. I mean, marketing is usually all about external validation. Sales numbers, likes, engagement.
It is. But if you're applying branding to your soul for survival, you don't care if the audience claps. You just need to believe that the main character you is capable of making it to the next chapter. It's about convincing yourself, not the audience.
Which brings us to the central metaphor that really ties all of this together. We've talked about branding, we've talked about editing, but the core image she uses is the book.
We all exist in books, she says.
But she clarifies, not the ones in the library.
No. She's talking about the books in people's heads. This is the philosophy she proposes. We exist in the stories people write about us in their own minds.
I have to tell you, I hate this idea. I mean, I get it, but it makes me so anxious. The idea that there are hundreds of versions of me walking around in other people's heads, and I can't proofread any of them.
It is a kind of existential horror, isn't it? The version of you that your mother has is a specific draft. The version your ex-partner has is a wildly different genre, maybe a tragedy or a villain origin story.
Oh, good.
The version your boss has is a boring manual,
Yeah.
and none of them are actually you.
And we spend so much energy trying to edit those other drafts. I catch myself doing this all the time. I'll say something and then worry, oh no, did that make me sound like a jerk in their story? I'm constantly trying to grab the pen out of their hand.
That's the human condition. We are desperate to control our reputation. But Farah's breakthrough, the reason she calls herself the architect, is that she decided to stop caring about those other drafts.
She says, I've decided to stop caring about their draft and start focusing on my own.
It's a declaration of independence. She realizes she can't force her friend to see her differently. She can't force the world to read her the way she wants to be read. So she focuses entirely on the only manuscript she has access to, her own consciousness.
It goes right back to that image of her holding the pen.
It's empowering, but it requires a lot of letting go. You have to be okay with being the villain in someone else's story. You have to be okay with being misunderstood.
That is a really tough pill to swallow. Let them misunderstand me.
But if the alternative is exhausting yourself trying to manage 1,000 different PR campaigns for every person you meet, isn't the fiction of your own making a better option?
It certainly sounds more sustainable. And she mentions she is comfortable with the ending being unwritten as long as she is the author.
Which connects back to the ADHD and trauma aspects too, right? If you have a history of chaos, the future is scary. It's an unknown void. But if you view yourself as the author, the future isn't something that happens to you. It's something you write.
It shifts you from being a passive victim of circumstance to an active creator. You aren't just reacting to the plot twists.
You're the plot twist.
Yes.
I love that concept, being the plot twist. It implies agency. It implies that you can change the genre of your life whenever you want. If you've been living a tragedy for 10 years, you can decide, okay, chapter 11 is going to be an adventure.
Or a comedy. Hopefully a comedy.
We can hope. But the point is, the pen is in your hand.
So if we kind of zoom out and look at this whole deep dive, we started with a woman being told she was fake. And we ended up with a philosophy of radical self-authorship.
It's a journey from shame to power. The work of fiction isn't an insult, it's a strategy.
It makes me think about the tools we use in our daily lives. We usually think of work skills and life skills as separate buckets. I do branding at work. I do being a human at home.
Farah challenges that binary, she asks. Why wouldn't you use your best skills to save your own life? If you are a great organizer, organize your mind. If you are a great storyteller, rewrite your trauma. It's about integration.
It's practical, but it's deep. It's not just think positive. It's build a structure that forces you to function.
And accept that the structure might look weird to other people. Your friend might think you're aloof. Your family might think you've changed. But if the structure keeps the roof over your head, well, it's a good structure.
We've covered a lot of ground here, from ADHD archiving to the philosophy of the safe character, but I want to leave everyone with the final provocation that Farah poses in her script, because I think it's the kind of question that can ruin your afternoon in the best possible way.
It is. It's a question that demands an honest answer. It forces you to look at your own agency.
She asks, are you writing your story, or are you just a character in someone else's?
So when you go into your next meeting or your next family dinner,
Yeah.
ask yourself that. Are you saying lines that were written for you by society or your parents or your past trauma? Or are you improvising? Are you driving the plot?
And if you realize you're just a background extra in someone else's movie, maybe it's time to grab the pen.
Start your own draft, even if it's a messy first draft.
Exactly. Be the plot twist. Thanks for diving deep with us today on the life and architecture of Faroohz Amjali Rawashdah. It's certainly given me a lot to edit in my own head.
Same here.
We'll catch you on the next one. Keep writing.